She made the whole world laugh. But behind that famous red hair and the $1 million smile, Lucille Ball was living a life that would have broken most people. She wasn't just Lucy Ricardo, the quirky housewife who got into wild situations with her Cuban bandleader husband. No, the real Lucille was something entirely different, raw, wounded, and haunted by a past she rarely spoke about. From the moment she entered this world, tragedy followed her like a shadow. She lost her father before her 4th birthday. Then her family lost everything, and I mean everything, because of one horrifying accident with a gun. That trauma, it wasn't just a sad chapter. It rewired her, leaving scars that showed up in her personal life, her parenting, even her relationships on set. And let's talk about that picture-perfect marriage with Desi Arnaz. America fell in love with Lucy and Ricky, but the truth? Their marriage was hanging by a thread, ripped apart by affairs, alcohol, and constant fighting. I Love Lucy didn't save their love. It was their last attempt to glue the pieces back together. And even that didn't work. But Lucille didn't stop. Even after the heartbreak, even after 2 miscarriages, even after being told she'd never make it as an actress, she kept going. She was told she wasn't funny. She believed it. But she still became the most beloved comedy star of all time. How? Because Lucille Ball wasn't trying to be funny. She was just trying to survive. And then came the fall. Her last few roles were painful flops, with critics turning on her like she was yesterday's news. The same people who once adored her now called her washed up and out of touch. One actor even called her a monster of staggering charmlessness. And trust me, it gets worse from there. Even her family life wasn't spared. Her son, Desi Jr., spiraled into addiction, fathered a child as a teenager, and became the subject of every tabloid's obsession. And through all of that, Lucille still showed up, still fought, still loved him with everything she had. But here's what really gives you chills. After she passed in 1989, some say she never really left. Her old Beverly Hills mansion, still rumored to be haunted. Neighbors heard screams. Glass shattered. Furniture moved on its own. Could it be that Lucille Ball, after decades of being misunderstood, was finally claiming her space in death the way she never could in life? This isn't just a Hollywood story. It's a real one. One filled with pain, scandal, love, regret, and a legacy that refuses to be forgotten. So stick with us, because we're about to uncover the haunting, heartbreaking, and unbelievably human life of Lucille Ball. And trust me, by the end of this story, you won't ever look at that iconic laugh the same way again. Before the cameras, before the fame, and long before anyone ever called her a legend, Lucille Ball was just a little girl trying to survive a storm of heartbreak. She was only 3 when it happened. Her father, Henry Ball, caught a nasty case of the flu just after the family moved to Michigan. The year was 1915, and medicine was nothing like it is now. But Henry wasn't the kind of man to rest, not even with a fever. He was a lineman for the phone company, and when a brutal storm knocked out the wires, he climbed those icy poles to fix them, sick, shivering, and soaked to the bone. Days later, that flu turned into typhoid. And just like that, he was gone. Lucille didn't just lose her father. She lost her foundation. Her mother was left grieving, broke, and overwhelmed. And the little girl who would one day become the queen of comedy was suddenly fatherless in a world that didn't care. But the hits kept coming. Her mother remarried a man named Ed Peterson, a hardworking but distant figure in Lucille's life. He wasn't cruel, just cold. And when he took a job in another city, Lucille and her younger brother were left behind with their grandparents in Celerin, New York. That house? It was small and modest, but it felt safe. For a moment, it seemed like maybe the worst had passed. But tragedy doesn't knock. It kicks down the door. On her 16th birthday, Lucille's grandfather brought home a .22 caliber rifle, a surprise gift for the family. It wasn't meant to hurt anyone, just a little target practice in the backyard with neighborhood kids. But the fun didn't last. In a split second, everything changed. A young girl named Johanna accidentally fired the gun. The bullet struck a boy named Warner in the spine. He survived, but barely, paralyzed for life. And then came the lawsuit. Warner's family sued. They won. Lucille's family lost everything again. The house, the furniture, every single item her mother had scraped together over years of payments gone. Her grandfather, devastated by the accident, never worked again. And just like that, the sense of safety Lucille had clung to vanished into thin air. Years later, she described it simply, "It destroyed our life together there." This wasn't just some childhood memory. It was the beginning of a mindset, one shaped by fear, loss, and instability. A life lived waiting for the next rug to be pulled out. And it would follow her all the way to Hollywood, shaping how she loved, how she worked, and how she protected herself when the world got too close. But if you think this was the worst of it, you're wrong. Because what her own mother did next would leave Lucille emotionally wounded in ways that even decades of laughter couldn't erase. And that's exactly what we're diving into next. Before she ever put on a wig or fell into a vat of grapes on national television, Lucille Ball was a little girl who had to beg strangers on the sidewalk to untie her. Yes, untie her. It sounds like something out of a twisted novel, but this was Lucille's real life. When she was just a child, her mother became overwhelmed, juggling a pregnancy, caring for a sick husband, and barely scraping by. With no one to help and no daycare in sight, her solution was as shocking as it was heartbreaking. She tied Lucille up in the backyard with a dog leash. And it wasn't a one-time thing. It became a routine. Day after day, Lucille sat alone in the grass, bound like a pet. Every time someone walked past on the sidewalk, she begged them to release her. But no one did. The leash wasn't just physical, it was emotional. A symbol of how trapped she already felt in a world where no one really saw her pain. Years later, in her memoir Love, Lucy, she recalled the experience not with anger, but with an eerie kind of acceptance. As if she'd already learned by then that love didn't always look like love. But that wasn't even the worst of it. Right around the same time, her father's typhoid diagnosis triggered something far bigger than just grief. The entire family was placed under strict quarantine. No visitors, no leaving, just walls and silence. Imagine being a child, already heartbroken, already leashed in the yard, and then being told you couldn't even see your neighbors, your friends, your extended family. Isolation wasn't a punishment. It was her new normal, and it left a mark that never fully faded. According to biographer Charles Hyam, this forced isolation carved deep psychological wounds in Lucille. It planted the seed for something much darker, paranoia. That lingering fear of being abandoned. The suspicion that people would leave, or worse, turn on you. It didn't just haunt her childhood. It followed her into adulthood, affecting everything from her friendships to her marriages to how she parented her own children. Think about that the next time you see her pulling a goofy face on TV. That wasn't just a bit. That was armor. Lucille didn't become Lucy because she was carefree. She became Lucy because laughter was a way to survive. To be adored was to be safe. To perform was to stay relevant. It was her version of staying off the leash. And the more you dig into her past, the more it becomes clear. Comedy wasn't just her career. It was her shield. But Lucille didn't just face trauma as a child. As a teen, she was hit with another kind of cruelty, one that came with a smile and a side of dismissal. Because when she told someone she wanted to be an actress, they told her she'd never make it. And that only made her want it more. Lucille Ball didn't just waltz into Hollywood with doors flinging open. In fact, the first door she ever knocked on slammed shut in her face. Hard. At 15 years old, full of dreams and desperation, Lucille had one goal, Broadway. She wasn't asking for fame or riches. She just wanted to be on stage, to escape the dull ache of her small-town life. So she enrolled in the John Murray Anderson School for Dramatic Arts in New York City, clutching hope like a lifeline. But her excitement didn't last long. Her drama teacher, respected, stern, and influential, looked her dead in the eye and told her she'd never make it. Not in acting. Not in this business. Not ever. And just like that, the dream was supposed to die. But Lucille? She didn't crumble. She dropped out. And instead of crawling away with her tail between her legs, she pivoted, reinvented, reinforced herself with grit and a new plan, modeling. She knew she wasn't the classic beauty. She knew others had better technique, better training, more connections. But Lucille had something that couldn't be taught, presence. The camera loved her, and soon, so did the world. Her face started popping up everywhere, drugstore posters, magazine ads, even cigarette campaigns. By the time Hollywood came calling, she wasn't just another girl from upstate New York. She was Lucy from the billboards, the one you couldn't forget. She landed her first film role in 1933's Roman Scandals, and it wasn't long before she secured a contract with RKO Pictures. They cast her in dozens of films, usually as a bit part or background girl, but she kept showing up, kept learning, kept surviving. But even then, doubt lingered. In a 1983 interview with Rolling Stone, decades into her legendary career, Ball confessed something shocking. "I am not funny," she said. "My writers were funny. My directors were funny. The situations were funny. What I am is brave." Let that sink in. The most iconic woman in comedy didn't believe she was funny, but she showed up anyway, again and again, pushing through every failure, every bad review, every industry insider who whispered she wasn't talented enough. She wasn't chasing glory. She was chasing validation, trying to prove to that one teacher, to herself, to the world that she could do it. And when she finally got the spotlight, she didn't waste a second. Lucille Ball built her empire not on laughter, but on willpower. Every joke, every pratfall, every wild-eyed expression on I Love Lucy wasn't just a gag. It was a battle cry. A middle finger to every single person who told her no. But her biggest battle wouldn't be against Hollywood critics or snooty teachers. It would be in her own home. Because while America was falling in love with the perfect sitcom couple Lucy and Ricardo behind the scenes, her real marriage to Desi Arnaz was unraveling, and fast. To the outside world, Lucy and Ricardo were the dream couple. They laughed, danced, fought, and made up with a kiss, all under the warm glow of black and white television. But behind that perfect chemistry was a woman crying alone in her mansion, and a man slipping further into the shadows of addiction and betrayal. Lucille Ball loved Desi Arnaz. No question. She called it true love from the start. But real love doesn't always mean lasting love, especially when it's tangled in fame, ego, and empty promises. Desi had a charm that could light up any room, and a darkness that could suck the air right out of it. Off-screen, he was a different man. The drinking started early. The cheating, even earlier. And while the cameras painted him as the doting husband, Lucille was home pacing the floors, clutching the phone, praying he'd come back sober and alone. Their friends knew the truth. And Southern, one of Lucille's closest confidants, said the pain ran deep. Lucille would call her in the middle of the night, sobbing, saying, "Get the priest. Do something." It wasn't just heartbreak, it was helplessness. She was living in the same house as a man she couldn't reach anymore. Keith Thibodeau, the boy who played Little Ricky, remembered what it was like on set. Desi was a great guy when he wasn't drinking, but when he was, you stayed away, and everyone knew it. The tension was thick enough to cut. Ironically, I Love Lucy, the very show that made them legends, was created to save their crumbling relationship. Lucille insisted on casting Desi as her on-screen husband to keep them together, but it only delayed the inevitable. Behind every laugh track was another broken promise. Behind every dance number was another night of silence. And Lucille, ever the performer, kept smiling through it all. For the show, for the fans, for the illusion that love could fix everything. But it couldn't. In 1960, after 2 decades of trying to hold the pieces together, she finally filed for divorce. Her words were simple but devastating. He was like Jekyll and Hyde. It was always the same booze and broads. Still, she never stopped loving him. That's the tragedy of it. Even when she walked away, a part of her stayed. Their story wasn't a fairy tale. It was a cautionary tale. A reminder that what looks perfect on screen is often anything but behind closed doors. And if you thought the marriage was painful, what happened during that time would hurt her even more. Because as Lucille tried to save the love of her life, she quietly endured 2 losses no one saw coming. 2 miscarriages that broke her heart and nearly broke her spirit. When America tuned in to watch I Love Lucy, they saw joy, laughter, that famous redhead pulling stunts, chasing dreams, and playing the part of the zany housewife. What they didn't see was the private heartbreak unfolding just behind the studio doors, a pain that no laugh track could cover up. Lucille Ball wasn't just playing a mother on TV. She desperately wanted to be one in real life, but the journey was anything but easy. Her marriage to Desi Arnaz was already hanging by a thread, pulled tighter by his drinking, affairs, and explosive temper. And in the middle of it all, Lucille experienced not 1, but 2 miscarriages. She never spoke about them publicly in detail, but those close to her knew the weight she carried. The woman who had been told to give up on acting, who built a television empire from scratch, was now quietly losing battles her audience would never know about. The stress of her chaotic marriage didn't help. According to those who knew her best, the emotional toll may have played a role in her miscarriages. One of her closest friends, actress Ruta Lee, said it best: Lucy always wanted to please Desi. Even when she was heartbroken, even when she was exhausted, she kept trying. She loved that man beyond logic. But even love has limits. In 1944, just 4 years into the marriage, Lucille briefly separated from Desi. The wounds were deep. But instead of giving up, they doubled down, working together on more projects, including the one that would become a cultural phenomenon, I Love Lucy. And then, just 3 months before the show premiered in 1951, something miraculous happened. Lucille gave birth to their first child, Desi Arnaz. She was 40 years old. At a time when most actresses were told their careers were over at 30, Lucille was juggling the launch of one of TV's biggest sitcoms and new motherhood. But the true triumph came 2 years later in 1953, when she gave birth to their son, Desi Jr. For Lucille, these weren't just babies. They were proof. Proof that she could still have a family, still have love, even if everything else was falling apart. In a 1980 interview, she called having her first baby at 39 the biggest accomplishment of my life. Not the Emmy Awards, not the production company, not becoming the first woman to head a major TV studio. Her greatest achievement? Being a mom. But being a mom in the spotlight wasn't easy. Long hours at the studio, a husband slipping further away, and deep down, Lucille knew she was carrying the emotional scars of a childhood spent mostly alone. She swore she'd never let her kids feel that kind of emptiness. But fate wasn't done with her yet. Because just when she thought she could finally settle into her legacy, her final performances would come crashing down, publicly, painfully, and with brutal consequences to her reputation. For decades, Lucille Ball ruled television like no one else. When I Love Lucy aired Monday nights at 9 p.m., the country stopped. Literally. Department stores closed early. Traffic cleared out. Even the water pressure in major cities dipped because millions of Americans waited until commercial breaks to flush their toilets. That's the kind of power Lucille had. But even queens fall. After I Love Lucy ended in 1957, she wasn't ready to say goodbye to her beloved character or the limelight. So she launched Here's Lucy in 1968, bringing her real-life children into the mix. It was a sweet attempt at a legacy handoff, and for a while it worked. But when she finally retired Lucy in 1974, she left behind more than just a character. She stepped away from the one thing that had always given her control, the stage. And when she returned, it was a disaster. In 1974, Lucille starred in what would be her final feature film, Mame, a musical adaptation of the Broadway hit. It should have been her victory lap. Instead, it became a public unraveling. The reviews were brutal, cold. Even the composer of the original show, Jerry Herman, couldn't hide his disappointment. He told the Miami Herald that Lucille just wasn't right for the role. But Lucille didn't stop there. She tried again, one final swing at a comeback. In 1986, she debuted Life with Lucy. She was 75. The world had changed. Comedy had changed. And worse, the writers didn't seem to realize it. They wrote her like she was still doing grape-stomping gags in 1953. But Lucille wasn't that girl anymore. The show was clunky, outdated, and completely out of touch. Even Lucille herself felt it. Her former publicist, Thomas Watson, said it best. They were writing for the Lucy that no longer existed. What she needed was a reinvention, something like the Golden Girls. What she got was a show that buried the legend she had built. Critics tore it apart. Viewers didn't tune in. The network pulled the plug after just 8 episodes. It crushed her. All those years of brilliance, of breaking barriers, of being the woman in a man's world reduced to a punchline about being too old to be funny. And it wasn't just the industry that turned cold. Fellow actor Richard Burton, in his private diaries, didn't hold back. He wrote, "She is a monster of staggering charmlessness. I loathe her today." The words were cruel, but they echoed something Lucille feared, that the world was done with her. And maybe it was. The tension on set became so thick, you could feel it. Keith Thibodeau, who once played Little Ricky, said that as she aged, working with her got harder. You had to walk softly around her, he remembered. There was a tenseness in the air. Lucille Ball had always used comedy to protect herself, but now the armor was cracked. The laughs were gone, and the curtain was falling. But if you think public failure was the end of her pain, just wait. Because her son, Desi Jr., was about to fall apart in ways that would shake Lucille to her core. Lucille Ball spent her entire life trying to hold things together, for the cameras, for her audience, for her family. But nothing could prepare her for watching her son, Desi Arnaz Jr., spiral out of control right before her eyes. From the moment he was born, Desi Jr. carried the weight of his famous name. He was the golden child of Hollywood's royal couple. But fame doesn't care about bloodlines. And pressure? It doesn't discriminate. By the time he was just 15, Desi Jr. already had a child of his own. He later admitted that from age 13, he thought he was in love constantly. But love wasn't what he was chasing. He was chasing something to fill the void. Attention, validation, escape. And it didn't take long before that escape came in the form of drugs. Lucille tried everything to save him. Friends said she was constantly worried, constantly checking in, constantly blaming herself. It didn't matter that she was a TV icon. When it came to her son, she was just a mother, terrified and heartbroken. Lillian Briggs Winograd, one of Lucille's oldest friends, revealed how deep the pain ran. Lucille had a lot of problems with Desi Jr. because of dope and everything. But she never gave up on him. And she didn't. Even as he pulled away, even as the headlines piled up, she stood by him. Quietly, fiercely, always. Desi Jr. eventually hit rock bottom. But instead of hiding it, he faced it. In 2020, he opened up about the journey, saying, "During the days I was doing drugs, my parents tried to help me. My father had a drinking problem. My mother was just like anybody else. But when I went into recovery, they were there. They came with me." That line says everything. Lucille didn't just support from a distance. She walked into the rehab center alongside her son, sat through the pain with him, cried with him, fought for him just like she had fought for her marriage, her career, her sanity. And somehow in that mess came healing. Desi Jr. eventually got clean. And in the process, he found something deeper, a bond with his mother that had survived fame, addiction, and public scrutiny. But it came at a cost. Lucille had already lost her marriage, lost her youth, lost her shot at a graceful career exit. And now, she'd almost lost her son. It was the final blow in a lifetime full of them. She was exhausted. And according to those closest to her, the years of holding everything together had taken their toll. Her temper got shorter. Her walls got higher. And the smile, the one that used to light up a room, started to feel like a mask. But still, she showed up. For her kids. For her fans. For herself. Because that's what Lucille Ball did. And just when it seemed like she could finally rest, finally enjoy the life she built, the past came knocking. Again. This time, in the form of ghosts, government investigators, and a house that refused to stay quiet. By the time Lucille Ball passed away, she had lived through nearly every kind of public scandal and personal heartbreak. But what came after might be the strangest chapter of all. Let's start with the whispers. Because according to some of her closest neighbors and friends, Lucille never really left her Beverly Hills mansion. After her passing in 1989, the stories started trickling in. Windows mysteriously shattered in empty rooms. Furniture moved by itself. Shouting heard from the attic when no one was home. Some said it felt like the house was alive. Others said Lucille herself never wanted to go. That the house, warm, filled with memories of family dinners and late-night rehearsals, was the one place she felt truly safe. Even a few of her friends claimed to have seen her ghost. A woman in a white robe wandering the halls. A presence felt near the stairs. Lights flickering on in the room that used to be her dressing area. It was eerie, intimate, and for many, comforting. Of course she'd come back. The stage was her life. The house was her sanctuary. But that wasn't the only controversy haunting her legacy. Decades earlier, Lucille had found herself at the center of a political firestorm, one that nearly derailed her career at its peak. In the 1930s, long before she became a household name, Lucille was trying to build her life in Hollywood. She rented a modest craftsman-style bungalow on North Ogden Drive in West Hollywood. It was quaint, charming, and just big enough for her and her brother. Eventually, her whole family joined her there. And tucked inside a drawer in that home was a document that would come back to haunt her. Her 1936 voter registration card. It listed her as a member of the Communist Party. Now, Lucille swore up and down that it meant nothing. That she was young, didn't understand politics, and only registered as a favor to her grandfather, who was, in fact, a known supporter of the party. He even hosted meetings at the house. But in 1953, at the height of America's Red Scare, the House Un-American Activities Committee launched an investigation into Hollywood's political ties. And guess who was on their list? Lucille Ball. She was questioned, scrutinized, threatened with blacklisting. In a different timeline, it could have destroyed her career. But Lucille was no stranger to pressure. She owned up to the registration but stood firm. She was never politically active, never supported any radical agenda, and had nothing to hide. And just like that, she survived another storm. Still, the damage lingered. The fact that her name had ever been associated with communism left a sour taste in the industry's mouth, and a shadow that followed her for years. A haunted house, a political scandal, a woman caught between legacies and ghosts. But even that wasn't the end of her story. Because after her passing, Lucille's most intimate belongings, love letters, awards, even her Rolls Royce, ended up in the hands of someone unexpected. And what happened next sparked a legal battle that would pit her daughter against her own stepmother for control of Lucy's legacy. Lucille Ball may have passed away in 1989, but her legacy, that didn't rest in peace. At the time of her passing, her estate was valued at over $40 million, nearly $80 million today. And while most people assumed her children, Lucy and Desi Jr., would simply inherit everything, that's not exactly how it played out. Lucille's second husband, Gary Morton, was left a significant portion of her estate. He had been by her side since the early 1960s, offering stability after the emotional wreckage of her marriage to Desi Arnaz. But when Gary passed away in 1999, everything he'd inherited from Lucille passed on to his new wife, professional golfer Susie McAllister. And that's when things got ugly. More than a decade after Lucille's death, McAllister announced plans to auction off some of Lucille's most personal and sentimental items. Love letters, handwritten notes, artwork, jewelry, even her Rolls Royce. It wasn't just stuff, it was history. Lucille Ball's history. And it was about to be sold to the highest bidder. Lucy Arnaz was horrified. She immediately tried to block the sale, calling it a betrayal and threatening legal action. These weren't just possessions, they were pieces of her mother's legacy. Awards Lucille had earned. Private memories never meant for public consumption. It felt like her mother was being stripped down and sold off, one item at a time. But McAllister wasn't backing down. She filed a lawsuit of her own, claiming she had every right to sell the items. A judge ultimately ruled that the auction could only be halted if Lucy posted a $250,000 bond, money she didn't have readily available. So the two women struck a deal. Lucy was allowed to claim her mother's most meaningful items, her Emmy Awards, memorabilia, key personal artifacts. The rest went to auction. In 2010, the sale brought in over $230,000. Strangers walked away with slices of Lucille Ball's life, and there was nothing her daughter could do to stop it. It was a final twist in a story filled with betrayal, struggle, and survival. Lucille's death itself had been sudden. After undergoing a 7-hour heart surgery in April of 1989, doctors were hopeful. Fans flooded Cedars-Sinai Hospital with cards and calls. Bob Hope publicly said what the world was thinking: there's only one Lucy. But just days later, her aorta ruptured. She passed quietly, alone in her hospital room. Her nurse later said she died peacefully, knowing the world still loved her. Maybe that's what she needed. Just a little reminder that despite everything, despite the heartbreak, the rejection, the failures and fights, people still adored her. And they still do. Lucille Ball wasn't just a star. She was a force, a survivor, a trailblazer who built her empire brick by brick, laugh by laugh, even as the world tried to break her. And somewhere, maybe she's still wandering those Beverly Hills halls. Not as a ghost, but as a legend who refused to be forgotten. Thanks for supporting the Gossip Blast. If you made it this far in the video, make sure to like and subscribe for more of the hottest celebrity news online.